The smoke moved differently in the old factory. Maya Reeves noticed it during her third walkthrough of the building, when the afternoon sun slanted through the broken skylight and caught the thin ribbons of air drifting through gaps in the walls. Most smoke rose straight up, dissipating into nothing. But in certain corners of the vast, echoing space, it behaved oddly, curling sideways, vanishing into seams that should have been solid, reappearing in places it had no business reaching. She told herself it was just draft patterns, the natural consequence of a building that had stood empty for nearly 2 decades. Old structures breathed in their own way. Still, something about those smoke trails nagged at her, lingering in the back of her mind, even as she tried to focus on more pressing concerns, like how she was going to make this crumbling factory into something that could support her and her daughter. The building sat on the eastern edge of the industrial district, a neighborhood that had seen better days decades ago and had been quietly dying ever since. Chain-link fences sagged around empty lots. Windows on neighboring warehouses were either boarded up or shattered into jagged teeth. Graffiti covered most available surfaces, layers upon layers of tags and murals that told the story of artists who had long since moved on. Maya's factory, she had started thinking of it that way almost immediately, despite the absurdity of the claim, stood among these ruins like a forgotten monument to something no one remembered. The building itself was 3 stories of red brick and timber, its facade weathered to the color of dried blood. The windows on the upper floors were mostly intact, though their glass was so thick with grime that light barely penetrated. The ground floor had once housed the main production area, where incense had been manufactured in industrial quantities for export across the country and overseas. According to the fragments of history Maya had pieced together from old business directories and faded newspaper clippings at the library, the Royal Spice Incense Company had been a modest success in the 1970s and 80s, employing 30 people at its peak and supplying specialty shops, head shops, and importers who sold to spiritual centers and temples. Then something had happened. The records were vague, frustratingly incomplete. The factory had closed suddenly in 2004. No bankruptcy filing, no dramatic story in the local paper. It simply shut down, doors locked, equipment left in place. The owner, a man named Vincent Cross, had disappeared from public records around the same time. The building had passed through a series of hands after that, none of whom had done anything with it. Property taxes had gone unpaid, liens accumulated. The structure molded in bureaucratic limbo, too contaminated with debt to be worth anyone's attention. Maya had found it by accident. She had been searching online for cheap commercial properties, anything she could afford, after scraping together every dollar from the settlement of her divorce, the sale of her old car, and a small loan from her mother that came with a weight of worry Maya tried not to think about. She needed space to work, room to build something of her own. Her daughter, Lily, was 8 years old, and asking questions Maya did not always know how to answer. Questions about why they had moved again, why they lived in a smaller apartment than before, why they could not afford the things other kids had. Maya wanted to give her daughter something better than vague reassurances. She wanted to build something stable, something real. The listing for the Royal Spice Building had been buried on the 3rd page of search results, posted by a city agency handling tax foreclosures. The price was listed as $950. Maya had assumed it was a typo. She called the number anyway, expecting to be told the property had already sold or that there were conditions she could not meet. Instead, a tired-sounding clerk confirmed the price and explained that the city just wanted the property off its books. There were environmental concerns, residual chemicals from the incense production, possible contamination, but nothing definitive. Whoever bought it would assume all responsibility for cleanup, inspection, and any liability that surfaced later. Maya had driven out to see it on a gray Saturday morning, Lily in the passenger seat with her sketchbook, drawing elaborate fantasy castles, while Maya tried to manage her expectations. The neighborhood looked worse in person than it had on the map. She parked at the curb and sat for a long moment, staring at the building through the windshield. It looked like the kind of place teenagers broke into on dares, the kind of place that ended up in news stories about structural collapses or fires. "Is that it?" Lily asked, looking up from her drawing. "Yeah," Maya said quietly. "That's it." They got out and walked the perimeter. The front doors were chained shut, but one of the side entrances had a rusted padlock that looked like it would give with enough pressure. Maya did not try it then. She peered through the ground floor windows instead, cupping her hands against the glass. Inside was darkness and debris, old machinery draped in tarps, wooden pallets stacked haphazardly, the floor littered with papers and broken glass. It smelled of rot and old smoke even from outside. Lily wrinkled her nose. "It's gross, Mom." "Yeah," Maya agreed. "It really is." But she bought it anyway. The reactions came fast once word got out. Maya's ex-husband, Derek, called within hours of her finalizing the paperwork, his voice tight with the particular kind of anger that always preceded his lectures about her judgment. $950 for a condemned building, he said, not quite yelling but close. "You took money from your mother, money she doesn't have, and you spent it on a factory full of toxic waste?" "It's not condemned," Maya said, keeping her voice even. "And there's no confirmation of toxic waste. The assessor said—" "I don't care what the assessor said," Derek cut in. "This is exactly the kind of impulsive, reckless decision that got us into trouble in the first place. You don't think things through. You never have." Maya gripped the phone tighter. She wanted to remind him that he was the one who had drained their savings on a business venture that collapsed within 6 months, who had insisted they refinance the house they couldn't afford, who had walked away from the marriage with a new girlfriend and a clean slate while she was left scrambling to cover rent and groceries. But she had learned years ago that arguing with Derek only fed his sense of righteousness. "I'm not asking for your approval," she said instead. "I'm informing you, because Lily will be spending time at the property while I work on it. If you have concerns about safety, we can discuss those like adults." There was a pause. Then, "Fine. But when this blows up in your face, don't come to me for help." He hung up before she could respond. Her mother was gentler, but no less worried. They sat in the cramped kitchen of Maya's apartment 2 days later, Lily at school, a pot of weak tea between them. Her mother's hands were wrapped around her cup as if trying to absorb its warmth, though the room wasn't cold. "Sweetheart," her mother began, and Maya felt her chest tighten at the tone. "I'm not trying to criticize, but this building, you're taking on a lot, more than you might realize." "I know it's a risk," Maya said, "but I've looked at the numbers. If I can clean it up enough to lease part of it, even just storage space, it'll pay for itself. And if I can get it rezoned, maybe turn part of it into live work studios, there's a real market for that." Her mother looked at her with an expression that was equal parts love and exhaustion. "And if you can't? If the repairs cost more than you have? If the city decides the contamination is serious and you're on the hook for a cleanup you can't afford?" Maya did not have good answers to those questions. She had run the numbers, yes, but the numbers were built on assumptions that might not hold. She was gambling on the hope that the building was salvageable, that the environmental concerns were overblown, that she could do most of the work herself. It was not a sound business plan. It was desperation dressed up as optimism. "I have to try," she said finally. "I can't keep living like this, Mom. I can't keep explaining to Lily why we're always one bad month away from losing everything. I need something solid, something that's mine." Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I know. I just wish it didn't feel so much like you're walking off a cliff hoping you'll figure out how to fly on the way down." The neighbors were less kind. The building was located at the end of a block that still had a few functioning businesses: a metal fabrication shop, an auto body garage, and a wholesaler that dealt in restaurant supplies. None of them were happy to see someone stirring up attention to the derelict property next door. The owner of the fabrication shop, a broad-shouldered man named Hank, stopped by the factory on her second day of cleanup. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching her haul out trash bags filled with debris. "You the one who bought this place?" he asked. Maya straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Yeah, I'm Maya." Hank did not offer his name or his hand. "You know the city's been trying to get someone to tear this down for years, right? It's a hazard. Rats, mold, probably asbestos. You're wasting your money." "I appreciate the concern," Maya said, keeping her tone neutral. "But I'm planning to renovate, not demolish." Hank snorted. "Good luck with that. Place has been a magnet for junkies and squatters. You'll be dealing with break-ins every other week. And when you finally realize you can't afford to fix it, the city'll condemn it anyway and stick you with the demo costs." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the doorway with a trash bag in each hand, feeling smaller than she wanted to admit. The comments piled up over the following weeks. People she barely knew offered unsolicited advice. Most of it, variations on the same theme. She had made a terrible mistake. At the grocery store, a former co-worker from the call center where Maya used to work spotted her in the checkout line and asked about her big project. "I heard you bought a factory," the woman said, her smile polite but edged with something Maya couldn't quite name. "That must be exciting." "It's a lot of work," Maya admitted. "I'm sure. I mean, it's brave of you, taking on something like that, especially with everything you've been through." The sympathy was worse than outright mockery. It carried the implicit assumption that Maya was in over her head, that this was another chapter in a story of bad decisions and inevitable failure. She smiled tightly, paid for her groceries, and left without lingering. Even Lily, in her own way, registered the pressure. One evening, while they ate dinner at the small table in their apartment, Lily looked up from her macaroni and said, "Jenny's mom asked me if we were moving into the factory." Maya's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What did you tell her?" "I said no, but she seemed like she thought it was weird that you bought it." "What do you think?" Maya asked carefully. Lily shrugged. "I think it's cool. It's like a castle that needs fixing." But what?" "But some of the kids at school said it's dangerous. They said there's bad stuff in the walls." Maya set down her fork. "The building is old, and it needs a lot of work. But I'm being careful. I'm not going to put us in danger, Lil. I promise." Lily nodded, but her expression remained serious. More serious than an 8-year-old should have to be. Maya felt the weight of it settle over her. The same weight she carried every time she thought about what she was risking. The first month of ownership was brutal. Maya worked during the day at a temp agency job that barely covered rent and groceries, then spent her evenings and weekends at the factory, hauling out decades of accumulated junk. The ground floor alone yielded 12 industrial-sized trash bags of debris, several broken chairs, rusted filing cabinets, and enough old paperwork to fill a dumpster. She found remnants of the incense production everywhere. Scattered sticks of brittle, discolored incense, empty containers labeled with faded brand names, powders that had spilled and hardened into strange, multicolored stains on the concrete floor. The smell was the worst part. It was not just decay, though there was plenty of that. It was something sharper, almost medicinal, mixed with the musty scent of wood rot and the faint, persistent odor of smoke. The smoke puzzled her. The building had been empty for nearly 2 decades, yet the smell lingered, as if something had burned recently. She checked for signs of fire damage, but found nothing obvious. No charred beams, no blackened walls. Just the smell, faint but present, woven into the very fabric of the place. She hired an inspector out of necessity, needing at least a basic assessment before she could move forward. He was an older man, methodical and unhurried, who walked through the building with a clipboard and a flashlight, knocking on walls and testing floorboards. When he finished, he sat with her on the loading dock and delivered his verdict. "Structurally, it's sound," he said. "The foundation is solid, and the load-bearing walls are intact. But you've got problems. Wiring is shot, plumbing is mostly corroded, the roof needs patches in at least 3 places, and you've got water damage in the northwest corner of the 2nd floor. As for contamination..." He paused, flipping through his notes. "I didn't find anything definitive. No obvious asbestos, no lead paint in dangerous concentrations. But I can't rule out chemical residue from the manufacturing process. You'd need a full environmental assessment for that, and those aren't cheap." "How much are we talking?" Maya asked, though she already dreaded the answer. 15, maybe 20,000 for a thorough workup. If they find something, remediation could be double that. Maya felt the number settle in her stomach like a stone. She did not have $15,000. She barely had $1,500. "What if I just work carefully?" she asked. "Ventilate the space, wear protective gear, avoid disturbing anything that looks suspicious." The inspector gave her a long look. "It's your building. I can't tell you what to do. But if you're asking my professional opinion, you're taking a risk." "Noted," Maya said quietly. He left shortly after, and she sat alone on the loading dock as the sun set behind the row of abandoned warehouses across the street. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep, bruised purple. She thought about Derek's voice on the phone, her mother's worried expression, Hank's dismissive snort. She thought about Lily's question. But some of the kids at school said there's bad stuff in the walls. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was reckless. Maybe she was walking off a cliff. But she was already falling. And turning back now would not change that. The 2nd month was worse. The temp agency job ended without warning when the company she had been assigned to decided to downsize. Maya spent a week scrambling for new work, eventually landing a night shift stocking shelves at a warehouse. The hours were brutal, and the pay was barely better than unemployment. But it was something. She adjusted her schedule, sleeping in short, fractured bursts, working at the factory during the late mornings and early afternoons when Lily was at school. The building began to reveal itself in layers. She cleared the ground floor, then moved to the 2nd, which had housed offices and storage. The offices were smaller than she expected, cramped rooms with peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings. Filing cabinets stood empty, their drawers pulled out and left that way, as if someone had searched through them in a hurry. Desks were overturned, their contents scattered across the floor, old invoices, shipping manifests, employee timesheets from 20 years ago. She gathered the papers into boxes, intending to sort through them later, though she doubted they would tell her anything useful. It was on the 2nd floor that she noticed the smoke trails again. She had been burning a stick of incense she had found in a sealed container on the ground floor, testing whether the old stock was still usable. It was not. Most of it crumbled at the slightest touch, but a few sticks had survived, brittle but intact. She lit one and set it in a holder, watching the thin ribbon of smoke rise toward the ceiling. Except it didn't rise. Instead, the smoke drifted horizontally, moving away from the window and toward the back wall of the office. It followed a path that made no sense, curling along the baseboard before disappearing into a narrow gap between the wall and the floor. Maya crouched, frowning. She waved her hand near the gap, feeling a faint current of air pulling inward. A draft, she thought. The building was full of them. But when she pressed her palm flat against the wall, she felt something else. A coolness that should not have been there, a temperature differential that suggested empty space beyond. She knocked lightly, listening. The sound was not solid. It was hollow, muted, as if the wall was thinner than it should be. She spent the rest of the afternoon examining that wall and others like it. There were more gaps than she had initially realized. Small openings, where smoke or air moved in unexpected ways. Some were near the floor, others near the ceiling. A few were hidden behind remnants of old furniture or stacks of debris. When she mapped them in her notebook, a pattern began to emerge. The gaps were not random. They aligned with the building's structural elements, beams, columns, load-bearing walls, in ways that suggested intentionality. Someone had built these spaces. Someone had designed them. Maya stood in the center of the second floor, surrounded by the scattered evidence of a business that had vanished without explanation, and felt the first real stirring of something more than frustration. It was not quite hope. It was curiosity, sharp and insistent, pulling her deeper into the mystery of what this building had been and what it might still contain. She did not know yet what she was looking for. She only knew that the smoke had shown her something, and she could not unsee it. The discovery of the hollow spaces changed the way Maya approached the building. She stopped thinking of it as a single structure and began to see it as a puzzle, a series of layers that did not quite align. At night, when she lay awake in the narrow bed of her apartment, she replayed the sensation of her palm against that cool wall, the hollow sound of her knuckles rapping against what should have been solid. She thought about the smoke trails, the way they moved with purpose, following paths that made no sense unless the building itself was more than it appeared. She returned to the factory the next day with a tape measure, a notebook, and a rough sketch of the floor plan she had drawn from memory. Room by room, she measured dimensions, marking down the length and width of each space. Then she measured the exterior walls. The numbers did not match. The interior rooms were smaller than they should have been, the discrepancies ranging from 6 inches in some places to nearly 2 feet in others. It was not the kind of variation that came from construction error. It was deliberate, systematic. Someone had stolen space from the rooms, carving out hidden cavities within the walls. Maya sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, staring at her notes. The implications were unsettling. Why would anyone build a factory with concealed spaces? The most obvious answer was smuggling, hiding contraband where inspectors would not think to look. But the incense business had been legal, small scale, and by all accounts, modestly profitable. What would they have needed to hide? She thought about Vincent Cross, the owner who had disappeared after the factory closed. His name appeared on old business licenses and shipping records, but there were no photographs, no interviews, no personal details beyond the bureaucratic trail of permits and tax filings. He had run the company for nearly 30 years, then vanished. The building had been left intact, equipment still in place, as if he had simply walked away one day and never looked back. Or as if he had been forced to leave in a hurry. Maya's next step was to examine the walls more closely. She started in the second-floor office, where she had first noticed the smoke, running her hands along the baseboard, feeling for seams or inconsistencies. The wall was painted a dingy beige, the color faded and chipped. But beneath the paint was something else, wood paneling, old and warped. She pressed against it, feeling the slight give of a material that had loosened over time. In the corner, near the floor, she found a narrow gap where the paneling did not quite meet the baseboard. She crouched and peered inside. Beyond the gap was darkness, impenetrable and deep. She grabbed her flashlight and aimed it into the space. The beam revealed a narrow cavity, perhaps 6 inches wide, running vertically along the wall, It extended upward beyond the reach of the light, disappearing into the structure above. Maya's pulse quickened. She moved to the adjacent wall and repeated the process. Another gap, another cavity. This one ran horizontally, following the line of the floor joists. When she stood and examined the ceiling, she noticed faint lines where the plaster had cracked, not randomly but along deliberate boundaries, as if sections of the ceiling had been removed and replaced. The building was not just hollow, it was honeycombed. She spent the rest of the day mapping the cavities she could access, using a thin metal rod to probe into gaps and estimate their depth. Some were shallow, barely deep enough to hide a stack of papers. Others extended several feet, suggesting spaces large enough to walk through. The pattern was clearest on the second floor, where the original offices had been arranged in a row along the western wall. Each office had at least one hidden cavity, and several seemed to connect, forming a continuous passage that ran the length of the building. By late afternoon, Maya's hands were filthy, her knees sore from crouching, and her mind racing with possibilities. She sat on the floor and tried to think logically. If the cavities were used for storage, what had been stored? If they were passages, where did they lead? And why go to the trouble of concealing them unless what they contained was worth hiding? The answer, she realized, might be in the debris she had already cleared. She returned to the boxes of old paperwork she had salvaged from the second floor, dumping them onto the floor and sorting through the mess. Most of it was mundane: invoices for raw materials, shipping logs, employee schedules. But near the bottom of one box, she found something different. A ledger, bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully. The entries were handwritten in neat, precise rows, dating back to the early 1980s. At first glance, it looked like a standard accounting record: columns for dates, amounts, and descriptions of expenses. But as Maya read more closely, she noticed inconsistencies. Some entries were marked with symbols rather than words, small notations that did not appear in any business context she recognized. Others listed expenses that seemed disproportionate to the scale of the operation. $50,000 for material acquisition, $28,000 for special handling, $75,000 for secured transport. The amounts were staggering, far beyond what a small incense manufacturer should have been spending on routine operations. And the vague descriptions offered no clarity. What materials? What kind of handling? Transport to where? Maya turned to the back of the ledger, where the final entries were dated in early 2004, just before the factory closed. The handwriting here was less controlled, the letters slanting and smudged. One entry stood out: final transfer complete, access sealed, documents archived. She stared at the words, her mind working through the implications. Final transfer. Transfer of what? And why seal access unless the goal was to ensure no one could follow? She closed the ledger and set it aside, her thoughts churning. The building was not just a factory. It was a vault, a place designed to hide something valuable enough to justify years of secrecy and expense. And whatever had been hidden here might still be inside, locked away behind walls and false floors, waiting for someone to find it. Maya did not sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the smoke trails, the hollow walls, the cryptic entries in the ledger. Part of her wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, a series of mundane explanations stitched together by her desperate hope for something more. But another part of her, the part that had scraped together $950 and taken a risk everyone said was foolish, could not let it go. By morning, she had made a decision. She would not stop at mapping the cavities. She would open them. The work began slowly, cautiously. Maya started in the second-floor office where the smoke had first led her, prying away the baseboard to expose the narrow cavity behind it. The wood was old and brittle, splintering under the pressure of her crowbar. When the section came free, she set it aside and shone her flashlight into the gap. The cavity was deeper than she had expected, extending several feet into the wall. At the bottom, barely visible, was something small and rectangular. She reached in carefully, her fingers brushing against metal. When she pulled it out, she found herself holding a rusted tin, no larger than a shoebox, sealed with layers of ancient tape. Her hands trembled as she peeled away the tape. Inside the tin were documents, old, fragile papers yellowed with age. She lifted them out gently, spreading them across the floor. They were certificates of some kind, ornate and formal, printed in languages she did not recognize. Some bore official seals, elaborate designs stamped in wax or embossed into the paper. Others had handwritten annotations in the margins, notes in cramped, hurried script. Maya picked up one certificate and held it to the light. The text was in French, she thought. Or perhaps Portuguese. She could not read it, but she recognized the format: a declaration of ownership, a deed or title. At the bottom, a signature: Vincent Cross. She gathered the papers carefully and moved to the next cavity. This one was larger, running vertically along the wall. When she pried away the panel, she found another tin, then another. Each contained more documents, more certificates, more records of transactions that made no sense in the context of an incense factory. By midday, she had uncovered 6 tins, each filled with papers that suggested a hidden economy far beyond the scope of the building's stated purpose. But it was the 7th cavity that changed everything. This one was in the back corner of the office, concealed behind a section of wall that had been reinforced with additional framing. Maya had to remove an entire panel to access it, the work slow and exhausting. When the panel finally came free, she found not a narrow cavity, but a shallow compartment, built into the wall like a safe. Inside was a wooden box, heavier than the tins, its surface polished and inlaid with brass fittings. Maya lifted it out carefully and set it on the floor. The box was locked, but the mechanism was old and corroded. She worked it with a screwdriver until the latch gave, the lock falling away with a soft click. She opened the box. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, were objects that took her breath away. Small, gleaming, impossibly beautiful. She reached in and lifted one out, holding it up to the light. It was a coin, but not like any coin she had ever seen. It was thick and heavy, made of gold so pure it seemed to glow. On one side was an intricate engraving, a ship in full sail, waves curling beneath its hull. On the other, a date, 1652. Maya set the coin down gently and looked into the box again. There were more, dozens of them, each one unique, each one bearing marks and dates that spoke of centuries past. She picked up another, then another, her hands shaking. She did not know what they were worth. She did not know how they had come to be here, hidden in a wall in a dying factory in a forgotten neighborhood. But she knew, with a certainty that made her heart race, that she had found something extraordinary. The question was, what else was hidden in this building? And who had put it there? Maya closed the box and sat back, her mind reeling. The smoke had shown her the way. And now, the building was beginning to reveal its secrets. Maya did not tell anyone about the coins. Not her mother. Not Lily. Certainly not Derek. She locked them back in the wooden box and hid it in the trunk of her car, wrapped in an old blanket. For 3 days, she went about her life as if nothing had changed, stocking shelves at the warehouse, picking Lily up from school, heating up frozen dinners in their cramped kitchen. But her mind was never still. Every quiet moment filled itself with questions she could not answer, possibilities she was afraid to examine too closely. The coins were real. She had held them, felt their weight, traced the engravings with her fingertip. They were not replicas or tourist souvenirs. They were old, genuinely old, and that meant they had value. How much value, she could not begin to guess. But enough to matter, enough to change things. On the fourth day, she drove to a coin shop in a neighborhood 40 minutes away, far enough that she would not run into anyone she knew. The shop was small and cluttered, its windows filled with display cases showing military medals, vintage watches, and rows of coins in plastic sleeves. A bell chimed when she entered. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a jeweler's loop hanging from a chain around his neck. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice polite but disinterested. Maya approached slowly, clutching her purse. "I have some old coins. I was wondering if you could tell me what they're worth." The man gestured for her to come closer. "Let's see what you've got." She reached into her purse and pulled out a single coin, the one with the ship engraving. She had brought only one, afraid that showing more would draw too much attention. She set it on the counter between them. The man picked it up casually, then stopped. His expression shifted, the disinterest replaced by something sharper. He held the coin closer, turning it over in the light, then reached for his loop and examined it in silence for a long moment. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "It was in an old building I bought," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "There was a box hidden in the wall." The man set down the loop and looked at her directly. "This is a Dutch gold ducat, minted in the mid-17th century. If it's authentic, and I'd need to test it to be sure, it's extremely rare." He paused, weighing his words. A coin like this, in this condition, could be worth anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000. Maya felt the floor shift beneath her. $20,000 for one coin, and she had dozens. "Are you interested in selling?" the man asked. "Not yet," Maya said, forcing herself to sound calm. "I just wanted to know what I had." The man nodded slowly. "If you decide to sell, you'll want to take it to an auction house. Don't go through dealers like me. You'll get a better price at auction. And make sure you get it authenticated first. Coins like this, there are a lot of fakes out there." Maya thanked him and left quickly, her heart pounding. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what she had just learned. If one coin was worth $20,000, and she had found at least 40 in that box, she was holding close to $1 million. Maybe more, but that was just one box, one compartment and one wall. What else was hidden in the building? Maya returned to the factory that afternoon with a new sense of urgency. She moved through the second floor systematically, prying open every cavity she could find. Some were empty. Others contained more tins, more documents, certificates of ownership for properties in countries she had never heard of, shipping manifests for goods described only as specialty imports, receipts for transactions that ran into 6 figures, and more boxes. Smaller ones, tucked into the deepest recesses of the walls. Each one contained coins, gold, silver, some so old the engravings had worn smooth. She stopped counting after the 5th box. The weight of what she was uncovering became too much to hold in her mind. By evening, her hands were raw from prying boards and lifting metal tins. She sat on the floor of the largest office, surrounded by the evidence of something vast and incomprehensible. The building was not just hiding wealth, it was hiding a system, a network of transactions and movements that had operated in secret for decades. The next breakthrough came when she examined the 3rd floor. She had avoided it until now, assuming it was more of the same. Storage rooms, debris, empty cavities. But as she climbed the narrow staircase, she noticed something different. The air was cooler here, and the smell of smoke was stronger. Not the faint, residual scent she had grown used to, but something more present, as if the source was closer. The third floor was mostly open space, a large loft that had once been used for drying and storing finished incense. Wooden racks lined the walls, their shelves empty and sagging. The floor was littered with broken sticks of incense, their colors faded to uniform gray. Sunlight streamed through the skylights, cutting across the dusty air in bright, slanting beams. Maya walked slowly, her footsteps echoing. At the far end of the loft, near the back wall, the floor changed. The wooden boards here were newer, their color darker, their fit tighter. She crouched and ran her hand along the seam where the new boards met the old. There was a gap, barely visible, but present. She pried up one board. Beneath it was not the foundation she expected, but another floor, a second layer of wood, set about 6 inches below the first. Between the two layers was empty space, a hidden cavity that ran beneath the entire section of floor. Maya pulled up more boards. Working faster now, adrenaline overriding her exhaustion, the hidden layer extended at least 10 feet, forming a rectangular compartment large enough to hold furniture, or crates, or something else entirely. At the center of the compartment, embedded in the lower floor, was a metal ring. She gripped it and pulled. The section of floor lifted, hinged on one side, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. Maya stared down into the opening, her breath coming faster. The stairs were narrow and wooden, their edges worn smooth by use. They descended at a sharp angle, disappearing into a blackness that her flashlight could not fully penetrate. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to stop, to call someone, to not go down there alone. But who would she call? The police? And tell them what? That she had found a hidden staircase in a building she barely owned? That she had already uncovered what might be stolen treasure? She did not know enough yet. She did not know what any of this meant. She descended. The stairs creaked under her weight, each step protesting with a sound that seemed too loud in the enclosed space. The air grew colder as she went lower, and the smell of smoke intensified, mixed now with something else. Earth, dampness, the mineral scent of stone. After 20 steps, the staircase ended at a narrow landing. Ahead of her was a door. It was old, made of heavy wood reinforced with iron bands. A rusted padlock hung from the latch, but it was unlocked, the shackle open and hanging loose as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten to secure it. Maya pushed the door open. It swung inward with a groan, revealing a space beyond. She stepped through and raised her flashlight. The room was large, far larger than she had expected. It extended beneath the entire footprint of the building, supported by thick stone columns that rose to the ceiling like ancient pillars. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled. Maya moved closer, her light sweeping across the contents. There were crates, dozens of them, stacked neatly and labeled with faded stencils. There were metal trunks, their surfaces corroded but intact. There were wooden boxes of every size, some small enough to hold in one hand, others large enough to require 2 people to lift. And in the center of the room, standing alone on a raised platform, was a vault. It was massive, taller than she was, made of steel that had darkened with age but showed no signs of rust. The door was closed, its surface smooth except for a circular dial and a heavy handle. Maya approached slowly, her heart hammering. She reached out and touched the cold metal, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. It was real. She tried the handle. It did not budge. The vault was locked, its mechanism sealed. She stepped back and played her flashlight across the surrounding crates, choosing one at random. The lid was nailed shut, but the wood was old and brittle. She used her crowbar to pry it open. Inside were more coins, not loose, but sealed in protective sleeves, organized in neat rows. She lifted one sleeve and held it to the light. The coin inside was gold, larger than the ducats she had found upstairs. Its surface engraved with a double-headed eagle and text in a language she thought might be Russian. She set it down carefully and opened another crate. This one contained not coins, but jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, rings, all heavy and ornate, set with stones that glittered even in the dim light of her flashlight. She picked up a necklace, its chain thick and intricately worked, the pendant a massive emerald surrounded by smaller diamonds. Maya's hands were shaking now. She moved to another crate, silverware, antique and elaborate. Another crate, rolled paintings, their canvases protected by layers of cloth. Another, small sculptures, cast in bronze and gold. Another, stacks of paper currency, old bills from countries she did not recognize, bundled and wrapped in plastic. She worked her way through the room, opening crate after crate. Trunk after trunk, each one revealed more coins, more jewelry, more artifacts. Some items were mundane, everyday objects from another era. Others were extraordinary, pieces that looked like they belonged in museums. And in the back corner, behind a row of trunks, she found something that made her stop completely. It was a ledger, much larger than the one she had found upstairs, bound in thick leather and secured with metal clasps. She carried it to the center of the room and set it on top of a crate, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with entries, thousands of them, written in the same precise hand she had seen before. But these entries were different. They were not expenses or transactions. They were inventories. Line after line of items, each one described in meticulous detail. Spanish doubloon, 1715, mint condition. Russian imperial necklace, circa 1880, emerald and diamond. French louis d'or, 1640, near perfect strike. The list went on for hundreds of pages, and beside each entry was a number, a value, she realized, an estimate of what the item was worth. The numbers were staggering. $10,000, $50,000, $120,000. Some entries ran into the millions. Maya turned to the final page of the ledger. At the bottom, in neat, careful script, was a summary. Total estimated value, $725,000. She stared at the number, her mind refusing to process it. $725 million. It was not possible. It could not be real. But the room around her was real. The crates were real. The coins, the jewelry, the artifacts, all of it was real. She had not bought a factory. She had bought a treasure vault. Maya sat on the cold stone floor, the ledger open in her lap, and tried to breathe. Her thoughts spiraled, unable to settle on anything coherent. This was not a windfall. It was not luck. This was something else entirely. Something vast and dangerous and utterly beyond her understanding. Who had accumulated this? Vincent Cross? And if so, where had it come from? The entries in the ledger spanned decades, items acquired from auctions, private sales, estate liquidations. Sources described only as recovered assets or secured acquisitions. Some of the dates went back to the 1960s, long before the incense factory had even opened. The factory had been a cover. That much was clear now. Whatever business Vincent Cross had been running, it had nothing to do with incense. The manufacturing operation had been a front, a way to legitimize the building's existence while concealing the real work happening beneath it. But why seal it all away? Why walk away and leave $700 million sitting in a vault under a dying factory? The final entry in the upstairs ledger came back to her. Final transfer complete. Access sealed. Documents archived. Had Cross intended to return? Had he been forced to leave before he could? Or had something happened that made retrieval impossible? Maya did not have answers. What she had was a room full of treasure and a growing certainty that she was in over her head. She could not keep this secret much longer. The sheer scale of what she had found demanded action, but every option felt fraught with danger. If she reported it, authorities would seize everything. And she would be left with nothing but the memory of what might have been. If she tried to sell it quietly, she risked attracting the attention of people who would not hesitate to take it from her. She closed the ledger and stood slowly, her legs unsteady. The vault in the center of the room loomed before her, its steel surface impassive. Whatever was inside that vault, it represented the heart of the collection, the most valuable items saved for last. She needed to open it. But first, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. The next morning, Maya called in sick to her warehouse job and drove to the public library. She spent hours in front of a computer, searching for information about Vincent Cross, the Royal Spice Incense Company, and any historical records related to treasure hoards or recovered assets. Most of her searches led nowhere, dead ends that told her nothing useful. But late in the afternoon, she found something. A brief article from a trade publication dated 1989, buried in a digital archive. The headline read, "Import Specialist Expands Operations." The article was only a few paragraphs long, a puff piece about a businessman named Vincent Cross, who had built a successful import-export business, specializing in cultural artifacts and specialty goods. The piece mentioned his incense factory as a side venture, a passion project that allowed him to explore traditional manufacturing methods. What caught Maya's attention was a quote near the end. Cross emphasized his commitment to preserving historical items that might otherwise be lost to time, stating that his work was as much about stewardship as commerce. Stewardship. The word felt loaded, deliberate. Maya read the article 3 more times, looking for anything she might have missed. There were no photographs, no additional details about the nature of his business. But the implication was clear. Vincent Cross had positioned himself as someone who rescued artifacts, who saved things from being destroyed, or forgotten, or stolen. Maya leaned back in her chair, her mind working through the possibilities. If Cross had been dealing in recovered assets, he might have been operating in a legal gray area, acquiring items from estate sales or auctions that had unclear provenance, buying collections that included pieces of questionable origin. Over time, that kind of business could accumulate significant wealth, but it could also attract scrutiny, especially if any of the items were later identified as stolen or illegally exported. Had Cross been forced to shut down? Had he hidden the collection to avoid legal consequences, planning to wait until the heat died down before retrieving it? And if so, what had stopped him from coming back? Maya closed the browser and sat in the quiet library, staring at the blank screen. She needed help. She needed someone who could authenticate what she had found, who could tell her what was legal to keep and what was not, who could guide her through a process she did not begin to understand. But finding that person meant revealing what she had discovered. And once she did that, there would be no going back. She left the library and drove to a small bookstore in a neighborhood she rarely visited. Inside, she found the section on antiques and collectibles and pulled down every book that seemed relevant. She bought 3 of them, along with a guide to numismatics and a reference volume on European decorative arts. Back at her apartment, she spread the books across the kitchen table and began to study. The coins were the easiest to identify. Many of them matched examples in her numismatic guide: gold ducats, Spanish doubloons, French louis d'or, Russian imperials. The descriptions confirmed what the dealer had told her. These were rare and in good condition. They were worth tens of thousands of dollars each. The jewelry was harder, Without hallmarks or maker's marks, she could only guess at origins and dates. But the quality was unmistakable. The pieces were substantial, crafted with a level of skill that suggested high-end production, possibly commissioned for nobility or wealthy collectors. The emerald necklace alone, based on the size of the stone and the intricacy of the setting, could be worth $500,000 or more. The paintings were beyond her ability to assess. She unrolled one carefully, revealing a landscape in oils, the style classical, the brushwork confident. There was no signature that she could see, but that did not mean it was worthless. Unsigned works by known artists sold for significant sums at auction, especially if their provenance could be established. And the vault. Whatever was inside that vault, it represented the pinnacle of the collection. Cross had saved it for last, locked it away behind steel that even decades of neglect had not compromised. Maya needed to open it, but she could not do it alone. 2 days later, she made a decision. She called a locksmith. The man who arrived at the factory was older, methodical, the kind of person who asked few questions and worked in silence. Maya had told him only that she needed a vault opened in a building she had recently purchased. He did not ask why the vault was there or what she expected to find inside. He simply surveyed the door, examined the locking mechanism, and quoted her a price that made her wince. "It's an old model," he said, running his hand over the dial. "High quality, but not impossible. I'll need a few hours." "That's fine," Maya said. "Take as long as you need." She left him alone and went upstairs to pace. She could not stay still, could not focus on anything except the sound of his tools echoing up through the floorboards. Lily was at her mother's for the night, which meant Maya had time. But time only made the waiting worse. 3 hours later, the locksmith called her down. The vault was open. Maya descended the stairs slowly, her legs weak. The locksmith stood beside the vault, his tools packed away, his expression professionally neutral. "All set," he said. "Door swings smooth, no internal locks that I could see." Maya paid him in cash, adding a generous tip, and waited until he left before approaching the vault. She stood before the open door, staring into the darkness beyond, and took a breath. Then she stepped inside. The interior of the vault was smaller than she expected, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, its walls lined with metal shelves. But every inch of space was used. The shelves were filled with boxes, each one labeled with a number and a brief description. Maya started at the top left and worked her way down. The first box contained diamonds, loose stones, graded and sealed in individual packets, each one accompanied by a certificate from a gemological laboratory. She counted 23 stones, their sizes ranging from 2 carats to over 10. The certificates listed their values, and she added the numbers in her head, stopping when she reached $8 million. The second box contained more coins, but these were different from the ones she had found elsewhere. These were ancient: Roman aurae, Greek drachmas, Byzantine solidi. She lifted one carefully, a gold aureus bearing the profile of Emperor Nero, and marveled at its weight and clarity. The third box contained documents, not certificates or receipts, but something else: deeds, titles, ownership papers for properties scattered across Europe and South America. Some of the properties were described as estates, others as commercial buildings or land parcels. She did not know if they were still valid, if the properties still existed, but the paperwork was meticulously organized, suggesting they had been valuable when they were archived. She moved to the next shelf. More jewelry, this time pieces that took her breath away. A tiara encrusted with diamonds and sapphires, a brooch shaped like a peacock with feathers made of enamel and precious stones, a set of rings so ornate they looked like something from a royal collection. And at the back of the vault, on the lowest shelf, she found a wooden case. It was longer than the others, heavier, its surface polished to a deep shine. She lifted it carefully and set it on the floor of the vault, kneeling beside it. The case was locked, but the lock was small. Decorative. She worked it open with a thin pick from the locksmith's leftover tools. The lid lifted with a soft creak. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a sword. It was beautiful, impossibly so, its blade gleaming silver despite the years. The hilt was gold, inlaid with rubies, and engraved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the light. Maya lifted it slowly, feeling its perfect balance. The blade bore an inscription, words in a language she thought might be Latin. She set the sword down gently and stared at it. This was not just treasure. This was history, tangible and real. Objects that had survived centuries and somehow ended up here, hidden beneath a forgotten factory in a dying neighborhood. Maya sat back, overwhelmed. The vault's contents alone likely exceeded $100 million. Combined with everything else in the room, the total would easily surpass the $725 million listed in the ledger. This was generational wealth, the kind of fortune that could change not just her life, but the lives of everyone she knew. But it was also a burden, because now she had to decide what to do with it. And that decision would define everything that came next. Maya spent the night in the factory, not intentionally. She had planned to go home, to pick up Lily from her mother's, to pretend for one more evening that her life was still ordinary. But after closing the vault and climbing back up to the third floor, she found she could not leave. She sat on the dusty floorboards, her back against the wall, staring at the hidden doors in the floor that led down to everything she had discovered. The weight of it pressed on her like something physical. $725 million. The number had lost all meaning, becoming too large to comprehend as actual money, actual possibility. She thought instead about what it represented: security for Lily, an end to the constant fear of eviction or utility shutoffs, the ability to breathe without calculating the cost of every breath. But she also thought about Vincent Cross, about why he had built this vault, filled it with treasures, and then walked away, about whether anyone else knew it existed, about what would happen if the wrong people learned what she had found. By dawn, exhaustion had dulled her fear enough that she could think practically. She needed experts, people who could authenticate what she had found, who could tell her what was legal to keep and what might be stolen or restricted. She needed lawyers, appraisers, specialists in art and antiquities. She needed help. But first, she needed to know if anyone had been looking for this collection, if Vincent Cross had stolen these items, or if they had been reported missing. Claiming them would make her complicit in theft. She could not risk that. She would not. Maya drove home as the sun rose, showered quickly, and picked up Lily from her mother's house. She forced herself through the motions of normalcy: breakfast, helping Lily with homework, a trip to the grocery store. But her mind was never still. Every quiet moment filled itself with plans, contingencies, fears that multiplied faster than she could address them. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Maya returned to her research. She searched for records of stolen art and antiquities, databases maintained by international agencies and law enforcement. She entered descriptions of items she had found, the coins, the jewelry, the sword, and waited while the databases processed her queries. Most returned no results. A few flagged items that were similar, but not identical. Nothing was a definitive match. Either the collection had never been reported stolen, or it had been off the books for so long that records no longer existed. She searched next for information about Vincent Cross himself. This time, she found more. Not much, but enough to sketch the outline of a man who had lived deliberately in the margins. Cross had been born in 1938, worked in import-export from the early 1960s onward, and established the Royal Spice Incense Company in 1972. He had never married, had no children listed in any public records, and had maintained a low profile throughout his life. But in 2004, shortly after the factory closed, his name appeared in a different context, a brief obituary in a Philadelphia newspaper. Vincent Cross had died of a heart attack at the age of 66. The obituary was sparse, mentioning only his business interests and a request that donations be made to a historical preservation society. There was no mention of family, no details about his estate. Maya sat back, processing this new information. Cross had died 20 years ago. Whatever he had intended to do with the collection, he had never had the chance. The vault had remained sealed, waiting, because the only person who knew about it was gone. That changed everything. If Cross had no heirs, no estate to claim the collection, then ownership might default to whoever held the property. Maya's hands trembled as she typed a new search: abandoned property laws and treasure trove legal status. The results were complicated, varying by state and circumstance. In some jurisdictions, treasure found on private property belonged to the landowner. In others, the state claimed a percentage, or the discovery had to be reported and held in trust while ownership was determined. The legal landscape was murky, full of precedents that contradicted each other. Maya needed a lawyer, a good one. The next morning, she made an appointment with an attorney who specialized in property and estate law. His office was in a downtown high-rise, the kind of place she would normally avoid because she could not afford it. But she could afford it now. Or she would be able to, once this was sorted out. The lawyer's name was Richard Brennan. He was in his 50s, methodical and cautious, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. Maya sat across from him and explained the situation in careful, measured terms. She told him about buying the factory, about discovering the hidden compartments, about finding the vault and its contents. She did not tell him exact values. Not yet. She only said the items appeared valuable and that she wanted to ensure she was handling the discovery legally. Brennan listened without interrupting, his pen moving steadily across a legal pad. When she finished, he set down the pen and looked at her directly. "First question," he said. "Have you reported this to any authorities?" "Not yet," Maya said. "I wanted to understand my legal position first." Brennan nodded. "Smart." "Second question. Do you have any reason to believe these items are stolen property or were acquired illegally?" "I've checked databases for stolen art and antiquities," Maya said. "Nothing matched. The previous owner died 20 years ago with no heirs. As far as I can tell, the collection was his, and it's been abandoned since his death." "And you own the property where the items were found?" "Yes. I have the deed." Brennan tapped his pen against the pad, thinking. Here's the reality. Treasure trove law in this state generally favors the landowner, especially when the original owner is deceased and left no heirs. However, there are complications. If any of the items were stolen, even decades ago, the rightful owners or their heirs could make a claim. You'll need to authenticate everything, establish provenance where possible, and document the discovery thoroughly. "How do I do that?" Maya asked. "You hire appraisers," Brennan said. "Experts in coins, jewelry, art, whatever you've found. They'll authenticate the items and provide valuations. Once you have that documentation, we can move forward with establishing legal ownership. If anyone comes forward with a competing claim, we'll have a record showing you acted in good faith." "How long will that take?" "Months, possibly longer. But it's necessary. You can't sell anything or move anything until the authentication is complete, and we've ensured there are no outstanding claims." Maya nodded slowly. Months. She could wait months. She had waited her entire life for something like this. "One more thing," Brennan said. "Once word gets out about this discovery, and it will get out. You're going to attract attention. Media, treasure hunters, people claiming they have a right to part of the collection. You need to be prepared for that. I will be, Maya said, though she had no idea if that was true. The authentication process began 2 weeks later. Maya hired a team of specialists, a numismatist for the coins, a gemologist for the diamonds and jewelry, an art historian for the paintings and decorative objects, and a conservator to assess the condition of everything. She paid their fees with money she did not have, charging it to a credit card, and hoping desperately that this gamble would pay off. The experts arrived at the factory on a cold Tuesday morning. Maya had cleared the ground floor and set up work tables with proper lighting. She had moved a portion of the collection upstairs, selecting items that represented the breadth of what she had found. The rest remained in the vault below, locked and secure. The numismatist was a woman in her 40s named Dr. Ellen Koss, her reputation impeccable, her manner brisk and efficient. She examined the first coin Maya handed her, a Spanish doubloon dated 1715, and her expression shifted immediately from professional interest to genuine astonishment. "Where did you say you found these?" Koss asked. "In the building," Maya said carefully, "hidden in the walls." Koss turned the coin over slowly, examining it with a jeweler's loupe. "This is museum quality. The strike is near perfect. The patina is consistent with age. If this is authentic, and I'll need to run tests, it's worth at least $40,000. "And if they're all authentic?" Maya asked, gesturing to the boxes lined up on the table. Koss set down the coin and looked at her. "How many do you have?" "Several hundred." The numismatist's face went pale. She picked up another coin, then another, working through the collection with increasing speed. She made notes, took photographs, sealed samples for testing. By noon, she had examined 60 coins, and her hands were shaking. "I need to bring in colleagues," she said. "This collection, if it's real, it's one of the most significant private hoards I've ever seen. We're talking millions of dollars, possibly tens of millions just in the coins alone." The gemologist, a quiet man named Peter Arendt, had a similar reaction when he examined the diamonds. He set up a portable spectrometer and began testing the stones one by one, measuring their clarity, color, and cut. After the 5th stone, he stopped and looked at Maya with something close to awe. "These are all natural," he said. "No synthetics, no treatments. The quality is extraordinary. The 10-carat stone alone is worth over $2 million on the current market." "And the jewelry?" Maya asked. Arendt picked up the emerald necklace she had found in one of the first crates. He examined it carefully, using a loupe to inspect the setting and the stone. "This is Colombian emerald, likely 19th century. The diamonds are old European cut. The craftsmanship suggests it was made for someone wealthy, possibly nobility." He paused, calculating. "At auction, a piece like this could bring anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million, depending on provenance." The art historian, a woman named Dr. Lillian Marsh, was more circumspect. She examined the paintings carefully, taking photographs and comparing them to reference images on her tablet. Some she dismissed as competent but unremarkable. Others made her stop and stare. "This one," she said, indicating a landscape Maya had thought was pleasant but unexceptional. "The brushwork is consistent with the Dutch Golden Age. If I had to guess, I'd say it's a minor work by a known artist, possibly a student of Rembrandt or Vermeer. It'll take time to authenticate, but if I'm right, it could be worth several million." By the end of the first day, the experts had examined less than a quarter of the collection, and their preliminary estimates already exceeded $50 million. By the end of the first week, that number had climbed to over 200 million, and they had not yet inventoried everything in the vault. Word began to spread. Maya had insisted on confidentiality agreements, but secrets like this did not keep. One of the appraisers mentioned the discovery to a colleague, who mentioned it to someone else, and within 2 weeks, a journalist from a local news station called Maya's phone. "Ms. Reeves," the reporter said, her voice bright with false friendliness. "I'm working on a story about a significant historical find in the city. I understand you recently purchased an old factory and discovered some valuable items inside. Would you be willing to comment?" Maya's stomach dropped. "I'm not doing interviews," she said. "I understand you want privacy," the reporter continued, undeterred. "But this is a story of public interest. People are going to want to know how a single mother on a limited income came into possession of what some are calling one of the largest private treasure hoards in the country." "No comment," Maya said, and hung up. But the damage was done. The story aired 2 days later, a 3-minute segment that showed footage of the factory, interviewed neighbors who expressed shock and disbelief and speculated wildly about the value of the discovery. The reporter described Maya as a struggling single mother who took a chance on a derelict building and found a fortune. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Maya's phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, people claiming to be distant relatives of Vincent Cross, treasure hunters offering to help excavate the building for a percentage of the find. She stopped answering calls from numbers she did not recognize. Hank, the owner of the metal fabrication shop, showed up at the factory 3 days after the story aired. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "So it's true," he said. Maya looked up from the work table where she was cataloging items with Dr. Koss. "What do you want, Hank?" "I wanted to say I was wrong," he said. "About you wasting your money. About this place being worthless." He paused, shifting his weight. "I laughed at you. We all did. I'm sorry." Maya set down the clipboard she was holding. The apology was unexpected, and she did not know how to respond. Part of her wanted to accept it graciously. Another part wanted to remind him of every dismissive comment, every sneer, every moment he had made her feel foolish. "I appreciate that," she said finally. Hank nodded and left without another word. Derek called a week later. His tone was different now, careful, almost tentative. "I saw the news," he said. "Did you?" Maya replied flatly. "Look, I know I gave you a hard time about buying that building. I was wrong. I just wanted to say that. Is that all?" There was a pause. "Lily mentioned you've been spending a lot of time at the factory. I want to make sure she's being taken care of." Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "She's fine, Derek. Better than fine. And for the record, I don't need your approval or your concern." "I'm not trying to fight," he said. "I just—" "Goodbye, Derek," Maya said and hung up. Her mother came by the factory on a Sunday afternoon, bringing lunch and a thermos of coffee. They sat together on the loading dock, watching the sunlight slant across the empty lot next door. "I've been worried about you," her mother said quietly. "I know," Maya replied. "I'm okay, Mom, really." Her mother looked at her, searching her face. "Are you? Because this is a lot. More than most people ever have to deal with." "It is," Maya admitted. "But I'm handling it. What are you going to do? With all of it?" Maya had been asking herself the same question. The authentication process was ongoing, and it would be months before she could legally sell anything. But she had already made some decisions. "First, I'm paying you back," she said. "Every dollar you lent me, plus interest." Her mother started to protest, but Maya held up a hand. "You helped me when no one else would. I'm not forgetting that. And then? Then I'm setting up a trust for Lily. So she never has to worry about college or anything else, and I'm going to find a way to give back. Maybe fund scholarships or support historical preservation. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to hoard this the way Cross did. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you." The full authentication took 4 months. By the end, the experts had documented and appraised every item in the collection. The final valuation came in at $738 million, slightly higher than the estimate in Cross's ledger. The coins alone accounted for over $200 million. The diamonds and jewelry added another $300 million. The paintings, sculptures, and decorative objects made up the rest. Richard Brennan filed the necessary legal documents, establishing Maya as the rightful owner of the collection. No competing claims emerged. Vincent Cross's estate had been settled decades ago with no assets listed, and no heirs came forward. The collection was hers. The first auction took place 6 months after the discovery. Maya consigned a small portion of the collection, 50 coins, 10 pieces of jewelry, and 2 paintings, to a major auction house in New York. The pre-sale estimates were conservative, but when the gavel fell on the final lot, the total exceeded $43 million. Maya stood in the back of the auction room, watching strangers bid amounts she could barely comprehend on items that had been hidden in her walls. When it was over, she walked out into the cold New York evening and called Lily. "Hey, Mom," Lily said, her voice bright. "How did it go?" "It went well," Maya said, smiling. "Really well." "Does that mean we can get a new apartment?" Maya laughed. "Yeah, sweetheart. We can get a new apartment." They moved 3 months later into a house in a neighborhood Maya had always admired, but never thought she could afford. It was not ostentatious. She had no interest in mansions or excess. But it was solid, comfortable, with good schools nearby, and a yard where Lily could play. The factory remained hers. She had no plans to sell it. Instead, she hired architects and contractors to renovate it, transforming the ground floor into a museum space, where portions of the collection could be displayed for public viewing. The second floor became offices for the foundation she established to support arts education and historical preservation. The third floor, where the hidden staircase had led her to everything, she left untouched, a reminder of where it all began. The vault below was emptied and sealed, its contents distributed to museums, private collectors, and trust accounts established for Lily's future. But Maya kept a few items for herself: the first gold ducat she had authenticated, the emerald necklace, the sword. Not because of their value, but because they represented something larger, proof that taking a chance, even when everyone said it was foolish, could change everything. 1 year after the discovery, Maya stood in the renovated factory on opening day. The museum space was filled with people: neighbors, journalists, art historians, students. They moved through the exhibits, marveling at coins and jewelry and paintings that had been hidden for decades. Lily stood beside her, holding her hand. "It's pretty cool, isn't it?" she said. "Yeah," Maya agreed. "It really is." A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Ms. Reeves, can I ask you a question?" Maya nodded. "A lot of people said you were crazy to buy this building, that you were throwing away money on a condemned factory. What do you say to them now?" Maya smiled. "I say that sometimes the things everyone tells you are worthless turn out to be the most valuable. You just have to be willing to look closer." The reporter thanked her and moved on. Maya stayed where she was, looking around the transformed space. She thought about the night she had first walked through the factory, seeing only decay and impossibility. She thought about the smoke trails that had led her to the hidden compartments, the hours spent prying open walls and descending into darkness. She had been desperate then, barely holding on, mocked by people who thought they knew better. And maybe they had known better, in a conventional sense. The factory had been a terrible investment by any rational measure. But desperation had made her brave, and bravery had led her here. Later that evening, after the museum closed and the crowds dispersed, Maya walked through the empty building one last time. She climbed to the third floor and stood at the spot where the hidden door had been, now sealed and covered. She thought about Vincent Cross, about the life he had lived in secrecy, accumulating treasures he would never enjoy. She would not make that mistake. The wealth she had found would not be hidden or hoarded. It would be used, shared, transformed into something that mattered beyond its monetary value. Maya turned and walked back downstairs, turning off lights as she went. At the door, she paused and looked back at the building one last time. The factory that everyone had laughed at, the impossible gamble that had changed her life. She locked the door and stepped out into the night, where Lily was waiting in the car. "Ready to go home?" Lily asked. "Yeah," Maya said, sliding into the driver's seat. "Let's go home." As they drove away, Maya glanced in the rearview mirror at the factory receding into the distance. The building stood solid and quiet, its lights off, its secrets finally revealed. She had taken $950 and a desperate hope, and she had built something extraordinary. And that, she thought, was worth more than any treasure. The camera would pull back here, showing the factory one last time in the fading light, before cutting to black. A final title card would appear on screen. Maya Reeves established the Cross Foundation in honor of Vincent Cross, dedicating a portion of the collection's value to arts education and historical preservation. The remaining proceeds secured her daughter's future and allowed her to live without fear of financial insecurity for the first time in her life. The Royal Spice Incense Factory Museum opened to the public in 2025 and has since welcomed over 100,000 visitors. Sometimes, the most valuable things are hidden in the places no one thinks to look. Maya had not expected the letters. They began arriving 2 weeks after the museum opened, forwarded by the foundation's office manager, in neat stacks, bound with rubber bands. At first, there were only a few. Handwritten notes on lined paper, typed letters on personal stationery, emails printed and filed. But within a month, the volume had grown to the point where the office manager suggested hiring someone specifically to handle correspondence. Maya read every one. Some were simple expressions of gratitude. A teacher in Ohio who had brought her entire class to see the coin exhibit wrote about how the students had been inspired to research their own local history. A retired factory worker in Pennsylvania sent a postcard saying the museum reminded him of his own father's workshop and how meaningful it was to see industrial spaces preserved rather than demolished. An elderly woman in California wrote that she had been collecting coins since childhood and had never imagined she would see such a collection displayed so accessibly. Other letters were more personal. A single mother from across the city wrote that she had been on the verge of giving up when she heard Maya's story, and that it had given her the courage to keep trying. A man who had lost his job wrote that he had bought an old storage unit at auction, something everyone told him was a waste of money. And while he had not found treasure, he had found tools and equipment he was using to start a small repair business. A college student wrote that she had changed her major to art history after visiting the museum, deciding that preserving the past was more important than the practical career her parents had wanted for her. Maya kept these letters in a box in her office, separate from the official correspondence. She returned to them on difficult days when the weight of managing the foundation felt overwhelming, or when she questioned whether she had made the right decisions about how to use the wealth she had found. Because the decisions were constant, and none of them were easy. The foundation's board met monthly, and each meeting brought new proposals for how to allocate funds, scholarships for underprivileged students, grants for historical preservation projects, partnerships with museums and universities, seed funding for small businesses in struggling neighborhoods. Every proposal was worthy, every request heartfelt, and there was never enough money to say yes to everything, even with hundreds of millions of dollars in the endowment. Maya had learned to say no. It was one of the hardest lessons. "We can't save everyone," Richard Brennan had told her during an early board meeting, when she had been agonizing over rejecting a proposal to fund a community arts center in a neighborhood, much like the one where the factory stood. "If you try, you'll dilute the impact of everything you do. Focus on what matters most to you, and do that well." She had taken his advice, narrowing the foundation's focus to 3 areas: arts education for young people, preservation of historical buildings and artifacts, and direct financial support for single parents pursuing education or starting businesses. It was specific enough to be meaningful, broad enough to reach people who needed it. But even within those boundaries, the choices were agonizing. One afternoon, Maya sat in her office reviewing grant applications. The stack was 6 inches tall, each proposal carefully researched and presented. She could fund perhaps 20 of them with the current year's budget. That meant rejecting more than 100. She picked up the first application, a woman in her 30s, recently divorced, hoping to return to school to finish a nursing degree. She had 2 children, worked nights at a grocery store, and needed help with tuition and childcare. Maya read the woman's personal statement twice, then set it in the approved pile. The next application was from a man who wanted to restore a historic theater in a small town. The building had been closed for 30 years, its roof collapsing, its interior gutted by water damage. He had a plan, a budget, letters of support from local officials. Maya studied the photographs of the theater, its ornate plasterwork, its decaying balconies, and felt the pull of wanting to save it. But the cost was high, and the town was small. Would enough people visit to make the restoration sustainable? She set it in the maybe pile and moved on. By evening, her desk was covered with sorted applications, and her head ached from the weight of deciding who received help and who did not. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The lights were coming on as the sun set, thousands of them, each one representing a life, a story, a person navigating their own struggles. She could not help them all, but she could help some, and that had to be enough. The museum itself required constant attention. The exhibits needed updating, the building needed maintenance, and the staff needed management. Maya had hired a director, a woman named Caroline Voss, who had spent 20 years working at major museums, but she remained involved in the day-to-day operations, unable to let go completely. She was there on a Tuesday morning when a school group arrived, 40 students from a Title I elementary school on the other side of the city. They filed in loudly, excited and chaotic, their teacher struggling to maintain order. Maya watched from the second floor as they entered the main gallery, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. One boy, smaller than the others, stopped in front of the case displaying the Spanish doubloons. He pressed his face close to the glass, staring at the coins with an intensity that made Maya smile. When the group moved on, he lingered, falling behind. His attention fixed on the display. Maya walked down and stood beside him. "Pretty cool, right?" The boy looked up, startled. "Are these real?" "They are," Maya said. "They're over 300 years old." "How much are they worth?" "A lot. Tens of thousands of dollars each." The boy's eyes widened. "And you just keep them here? Aren't you afraid someone will steal them?" "We have good security," Maya said. "And besides, they're meant to be seen. What good is treasure if it's locked away where no one can enjoy it?" The boy considered this. "My mom says we're poor, but I don't think we're poor like people used to be poor. We have a TV and stuff." Maya crouched beside him. "What's your name?" "Carlos." "Well, Carlos, being poor isn't about what you have. It's about what you're worried you might lose. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is find something you're good at and work really hard at it. That's what I did." "Did you find these coins?" Carlos asked. I found them hidden in this building, Maya said. I bought the building when everyone said it was worthless. But I knew there was something special about it. Carlos looked around the museum, then back at the coins. I want to find treasure someday. You will, Maya said. It might not look like this, but you will. The boy's teacher called for him, and he ran off, his footsteps echoing through the gallery. Maya stood slowly, watching him go. She thought about Lily at that age, about her own childhood, about all the children who grew up believing the world had already decided what they were worth. She walked back upstairs and called the director. I want to expand the school program, she said. Every Title I school in the city should be able to bring students here for free, and I want to provide transportation funding so cost isn't a barrier. That's going to be expensive, Caroline said. I know. Do it anyway. The attention that came with the discovery never fully subsided. Maya had become, despite her reluctance, a minor public figure. She was invited to speak at conferences and universities, to appear on podcasts and news programs. She declined most requests, but accepted some, particularly when the platform allowed her to talk about the Foundation's work. One speaking engagement took her to a women's business summit in Chicago. She stood on a stage in front of 300 people and told the story of the factory, of the $950, of the mockery and doubt, and the moment when she realized what she had found. People told me I was being reckless, she said, looking out at the audience. And they were right. By any rational measure, buying that building was a terrible decision. But desperation doesn't allow for rational decisions. It forces you to take chances you wouldn't otherwise take. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, those chances pay off. During the Q&A, a woman in the third row raised her hand. How do you deal with guilt? She asked. You found something worth hundreds of millions of dollars by accident, while people who work their entire lives will never see that kind of wealth. How do you justify that? The question hung in the air, heavy and challenging. Maya had asked herself the same thing countless times. I don't know if I can justify it, she said honestly. I got lucky. Incredibly, impossibly lucky. And I'm aware every day that nothing I did made me deserve this more than anyone else. But I can choose what to do with it. I can use it to create opportunities for other people, to preserve things that matter, to try to balance the scales even a little bit. That's not justification. It's just responsibility. The woman nodded slowly, and the room was quiet for a moment before the next question came. Afterward, several people approached Maya, wanting to share their own stories. A woman who had started a non-profit with money from a small inheritance. A man who had bought a failing bookstore and turned it into a community hub. A young entrepreneur who had used her savings to open a cafe that employed people re-entering society after incarceration. Each of them carried the same mix of hope and uncertainty, the same awareness that they were one bad month away from losing everything. Maya exchanged contact information with several of them, promising to stay in touch. She meant it. These were her people, not the wealthy donors and museum patrons who attended the Foundation's galas, but the ones still fighting, still taking risks, still refusing to accept that their circumstances were permanent. On the flight home, Maya stared out the window at the clouds below and thought about the boy in the museum, about the woman who had asked about guilt, about all the letters stacked in boxes in her office. She thought about Vincent Cross, about whether he had ever felt the weight of what he had accumulated, whether he had died satisfied or regretful. She would never know, but she knew what she felt: grateful, overwhelmed, and determined not to waste what had been given to her. The second anniversary of the discovery arrived quietly. Maya marked it by spending the day at the factory, walking through the museum, and remembering what the building had looked like when she first stepped inside. She climbed to the third floor, now converted into offices and meeting rooms, and stood at the spot where the hidden staircase had been. Caroline found her there. "You okay?" "Yeah," Maya said. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how close I came to not buying this place. I almost talked myself out of it a dozen times. If I'd been a little less desperate, or a little more sensible, I would have walked away." "But you didn't," Caroline said. "No," Maya agreed. "I didn't." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out the window at the neighborhood beyond. The area was changing. New businesses had opened on the block, drawn by the foot traffic from the museum. The empty lots were being cleared and developed. The auto body shop next door had expanded, and Hank had mentioned at a recent block association meeting that business had doubled in the past year. "You've changed this place," Caroline said. "Not just the building, the whole neighborhood." Maya shook her head. The neighborhood was always worth something. People just needed a reason to pay attention. That evening, Maya drove home to find Lily waiting on the front porch. She was 10 now, taller and more confident, but still prone to sprawling across the couch with her sketchbook, drawing elaborate fantasy worlds. "How was your day?" Maya asked, sitting beside her. "Good. We learned about archaeology in school. Mrs. Patterson said your factory discovery was like a modern archaeological find." Maya smiled. "That's one way to look at it." "She also said we could do a field trip to the museum if we wanted. Can we?" "Of course. I'll talk to her." Lily set down her sketchbook. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever wish you hadn't found the treasure? Like, that things could have just stayed normal?" Maya considered the question carefully. Normal had meant fear and instability, meant checking the bank balance before buying groceries, meant lying awake at night calculating how long they could survive if she lost her job. Normal had been exhausting. "No," she said. "I don't wish that, but I understand why you're asking. Things got complicated after the discovery." "Yeah," Lily said, "but good complicated. I like our house, and I like that you're not stressed all the time." Maya pulled her daughter close. "Me too." They sat together on the porch as the sun set, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. Somewhere nearby, someone was grilling, the smell of charcoal and smoke drifting on the breeze. A couple walked past with a dog. A car turned onto the street, its headlights sweeping across the front of the house. It was ordinary. Beautifully, perfectly ordinary. And Maya had never been more grateful for anything in her life. The smoke had shown her the way, all those months ago. It had revealed the hidden spaces, the paths that led to treasure. But the real discovery, she realized now, was not the coins or the jewelry or the artifacts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was the knowledge that she could trust herself, that when everyone else saw worthlessness, she could see possibility, that taking a chance, even a reckless one, was sometimes the only way forward. The factory had given her wealth, but it had given her something more valuable too, the certainty that she was capable of more than surviving. She could build, she could create, she could change not just her own life, but the lives of people she had never met. And that, Maya thought, was the real treasure. The one that could never be locked in a vault or sold at auction. The one that would last long after the coins and jewels were gone. Inside the house, the phone rang. Maya stood and went to answer it. Leaving Lily on the porch with her drawings, it was the foundation office. Another stack of letters had arrived, and several required her immediate attention. There was a proposal for a new exhibit, a request for funding from a promising project, and a message from a journalist working on a documentary about treasure discoveries. Maya listened, taking notes, already thinking about schedules and budgets and the 100 small decisions that would fill tomorrow. "I'll be in first thing in the morning," she said, and hung up. She returned to the porch. Lily had gone inside, and the street was quiet now, the last light fading from the sky. Maya stood for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet. The factory had been a gamble. The discovery had been luck. But everything that came after, the foundation, the museum, the lives touched and changed, that was choice. And Maya had chosen well. She went inside, locked the door behind her, and turned on the lights. Home. Real and solid and hers. The smoke had revealed the doorways, but she was the one who had walked through them. The third year brought challenges Maya had not anticipated. The foundation's endowment had grown through careful investment, but so had the demands on it. The number of grant applications tripled. The museum's operating costs increased as attendance grew and exhibits required updating. And Maya found herself navigating a world she had never expected to inhabit, one of wealth managers, tax attorneys, and philanthropic advisors who spoke in a language that still felt foreign. She hired a chief financial officer, a man named Thomas Guerrero, who had managed endowments for larger foundations. He was methodical and cautious, qualities Maya appreciated even when they frustrated her. "You can't approve every grant that tugs at your heartstrings," he told her during a budget review meeting. "The foundation needs to exist in perpetuity. That means we can only distribute a certain percentage each year. If you give away too much too fast, there won't be anything left for the next generation." Maya stared at the spreadsheet in front of her, rows of numbers that represented real people with real needs. "How do you decide who gets help and who doesn't?" "You establish criteria and stick to them," Thomas said. "Remove the emotion from the process as much as possible." But Maya could not remove the emotion. Every rejected application felt personal. A reminder that her good fortune was not shared equally, that the system that had allowed her to stumble into wealth was the same system that kept so many others locked in poverty. She began working longer hours, trying to find ways to stretch the foundation's resources further. She negotiated partnerships with other organizations, leveraging the foundation's reputation to secure matching grants. She personally reviewed every rejected application, looking for ways to offer partial funding or connect applicants with other resources. Her mother noticed the toll it was taking. They met for lunch on a Saturday afternoon at a small cafe near Maya's house. Her mother studied her across the table, concern evident in her expression. "You're exhausted," she said bluntly. "I'm fine," Maya replied automatically. "You're not. You're carrying too much. You always have." Maya set down her fork. "What am I supposed to do, Mom? People are counting on me. The foundation, the museum, Lily. Lily has everything she needs," her mother interrupted gently, "including a mother who's present, not just physically, but emotionally. When's the last time you took a day off? A real day, where you didn't check your email or think about grant applications?" Maya could not remember. The truth was, she felt guilty resting. Guilty spending money on herself when there were people who needed it more. Guilty enjoying her good fortune when she knew how arbitrary it had been. "I keep thinking about all the people who didn't get lucky," Maya said quietly. "All the single mothers working 2 jobs who will never catch a break. All the people living one emergency away from losing everything. How do I justify having this much when they have so little?" Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "By living your life. By being happy. By showing Lily that success doesn't have to mean sacrificing everything else. You can't fix wealth inequality single-handedly, sweetheart. And you'll destroy yourself trying." Maya nodded, but the guilt remained, a constant weight that colored every decision. The museum expanded its programming that year, adding evening lectures and weekend workshops. Maya attended many of them, sitting in the back row and listening as experts discussed numismatics, art history, and the ethics of private collections. One evening, a professor from a nearby university gave a talk about treasure troves and their legal complexities. He discussed famous cases, hoards found in fields, artifacts discovered during construction projects, families who inherited collections without realizing their value. He spoke about the tension between private ownership and public interest, about how the law struggled to balance individual rights with cultural preservation. During the Q&A, someone asked about Maya's discovery specifically. The cross collection, the professor said, using the formal name the museum had adopted. It's a fascinating case because it highlights the role of chance in wealth distribution. Ms. Reeves made a modest investment and received an extraordinary return, not through skill or merit, but through luck. It raises philosophical questions about whether she has a greater obligation to society than someone who earned their wealth through labor. Maya felt the eyes of other audience members turn toward her, scattered in the crowd. She kept her expression neutral, but the professor's words stung, even though they echoed thoughts she had herself. After the lecture, she approached him. "I'm Maya Reeves." The professor's eyes widened slightly. "Ms. Reeves, I hope I didn't offend." "You didn't," Maya said. "You raised valid points. But I'd like to offer a different perspective." "Please." "Luck played a role, yes. But I bought that building when everyone said I was crazy. I spent months clearing debris and investigating anomalies no one else would have noticed. I took a risk that no rational person would take because I was desperate enough to see possibility where others saw only ruin. Was that luck? Or was that something else?" The professor considered this. Perhaps both. Luck in what you found, agency in how you found it. "And obligation," Maya added. "You're right that I have an obligation to society. But that obligation isn't unique to me. Everyone who benefits from this economic system has an obligation to those who don't. The only difference is that my good fortune was sudden and visible, which makes people pay attention to it." The professor nodded slowly. "That's a fair point." They talked for another 20 minutes, a conversation that challenged both of them to refine their thinking. When Maya left, she felt lighter, as if articulating her thoughts had given her permission to hold them. Lily's school held a career day that spring, and Maya volunteered to speak. She stood in front of a classroom of 5th graders and told them an edited version of her story, leaving out the exact value of what she had found, focusing instead on the decisions she had made and why. "Sometimes taking a risk means you'll fail," she told them, "and that's scary. But not taking a risk means you'll never know what might have been possible, and that can be even scarier." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "But what if you don't have money to take a risk? What if you're too poor?" It was a question Maya had anticipated. Some of the biggest risks don't require money. They require courage, speaking up when something is wrong, applying for a program everyone says you won't get into, learning a skill people tell you is too hard. Those are risks, too, and those are available to everyone. Another student asked, "Are you glad you found the treasure?" Maya paused, considering her answer carefully. "I'm grateful for what it's allowed me to do, for my daughter's security, for the foundation and the museum. But finding treasure didn't make me happy. It made my life easier, which is different. Happiness came from watching my daughter thrive, from seeing people visit the museum and feel inspired, from knowing I'm helping others take their own risks. That's what matters." After the presentation, several students came up to thank her. One boy, quiet throughout the class, approached last. "My mom works 3 jobs, he said softly. "She's really tired all the time." Maya crouched to his eye level. "What's your mom's name?" "Angela." "Angela is taking a risk every day," Maya said. "She's risking her health and her time because she believes in giving you a better future. That's the biggest risk of all, and that makes her incredibly brave." The boy's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded quickly before walking away. Maya stood slowly, her own throat tight. She thought about her years of struggle, about the nights she had cried from exhaustion and fear, about how close she had come to breaking. That evening, she looked up Angela's information through the school directory and sent a letter to the foundation office. "I want to create an emergency fund," she wrote, "for parents like Angela. No application process, no bureaucracy. Teachers and counselors can nominate families who need immediate help. Rent, utilities, medical bills. Fast response, no questions asked." Thomas pushed back when she proposed it at the next board meeting. "That's not sustainable. You can't run a charitable foundation on impulse." "I'm not," Maya said firmly. "I'm running it on the understanding that emergencies don't wait for grant cycles. We can set a budget for the emergency fund, but it needs to exist." The board approved it, and within 3 months, the fund had helped 60 families. Maya received thank you notes that she added to her growing collection, each one a reminder of why the work mattered. But the work took its toll. Maya found herself lying awake at night, mentally reviewing budgets and applications and all the decisions that needed making. She snapped at Lily over small things, then felt guilty for hours afterward. She skipped meals and forgot appointments. She existed in a state of constant low-grade anxiety that no amount of wealth could alleviate. It was Richard Brennan who finally intervened. He called her into his office on a Thursday afternoon and closed the door. "You're burning out," he said without preamble. Maya started to protest, but he held up a hand. "I've seen it before. People who come into sudden wealth often feel they have to prove they deserve it. They work themselves to exhaustion trying to justify their good fortune. But here's the truth. You don't owe anyone justification. You can choose to help people, or you can choose to live your life quietly. Both are legitimate options." "I can't just live quietly," Maya said. "Not when I have the resources to make a difference." "Then make a sustainable difference," Richard said. "Hire more staff. Delegate more responsibilities. Trust other people to carry some of the weight. Because if you collapse, the foundation collapses with you." Maya knew he was right. She had been holding too tightly to control, afraid that if she let go even a little, everything would fall apart. But the cost of that control was becoming unbearable. She hired an executive director for the foundation, a woman named Patricia Reyes, who had decades of nonprofit experience. She promoted Caroline to chief operating officer of the museum, giving her full authority over daily operations. She reduced her own role to strategic oversight and major decisions, attending fewer meetings and trusting her team to handle the details. It felt terrifying at first, like stepping back from the edge of a cliff and hoping the ground would hold. But slowly, the pressure eased. She slept better. She spent more time with Lily. She rediscovered parts of herself that had been buried under responsibility and guilt. One Saturday afternoon, she and Lily drove out to the coast, just the two of them. They walked along the beach, collecting shells and watching the waves crash against the rocks. It was the first time in months that Maya had not thought about the foundation or the museum for more than an hour. "This is nice," Lily said, kicking at the surf. "Yeah," Maya agreed. "It really is." "Mom? Do you think you'll ever stop feeling like you have to save everyone?" Maya looked at her daughter, surprised by the perceptiveness of the question. "I don't know. Maybe not. But I'm learning that I can't save everyone, and that's okay." Lily nodded, picking up a perfect sand dollar and handing it to her mother. "Good, because I kind of need you to just be my mom sometimes, not a superhero." Maya held the sand dollar carefully, its delicate surface intact despite the ocean's violence. "I can do that." They stayed at the beach until sunset. then drove home in comfortable silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Maya's phone buzzed with messages. Updates from the foundation, questions from museum staff, requests for her time and attention. She silenced the phone and put it in her bag. Tomorrow was soon enough to return to the work. Tonight, she would be present. She would be enough, exactly as she was. The smoke had revealed hidden treasures. But the real lesson Maya understood now was that some things could not be found by searching. Some things, peace, balance, the ability to simply exist without proving her worth, had to be chosen, deliberately and repeatedly. Even when the world demanded otherwise, she chose them now. And in that choice, she found a kind of wealth no vault could contain. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.